I am Jim Zogby, and welcome to Viewpoint. Tonight, it's going to talk all about Gaza. Every aspect of the show will be something to deal with this crisis in Gaza. First, we'll talk about Turkey's reaction to the flotilla attack, as well as its role in the Iran fuel swap and its emerging role as a Middle East broker. We'll then talk to Ambassador Edward Peck, who was in the Gaza aid flotilla that came under attack and was captured by the Israelis. We'll talk about his experiences during that. We'll have Bill Corcoran on from ANERA to talk about the humanitarian dimension, but my first guest is Mark Perry. He's a military and intelligence and foreign affairs analyst who worked for much of the last 2 decades in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. He's the author of 7 books, including his latest, which is called Talking to Terrorists: Why America Must Engage with Its Enemies. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
I was speaking to a friend of mine in the Arab world just a couple of days ago who commented on the Israeli attack in Gaza in 2006, and then the war in Lebanon in 2006, and then the war in Gaza again in 2009, and the failed assassination attempt, or the assassination attempt, but the one they didn't get away with in Dubai, and now this. And he was raising, I think, an interesting question that Israel certainly has this overwhelming military force and this capacity to use it, but their intelligence is not always what it's been reputed to be, and that frequently their heavy-handedness gets them into more trouble than problems they solve. And with that in mind, I think it was an astute observation. Looking at this particular assault, what were they thinking, and did it go as planned, or was this another example of using a sledgehammer when something else would have been in order, and it gets them in more trouble than it solves a problem?
Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, my focus is on the military. I deal a lot with the U.S. military, and my first calls after this incident were to senior U.S. naval officers, and every one of them said the same thing. The last option that you should have as a naval officer is to board a ship on the open seas in international waters. You do everything else first. Knock out the rudder, take out the steerage, shoot across the bow. Even if you're going to go onto the deck, concussion grenades, tear gas, to rappel from helicopters onto a deck and to assume that you're going to be greeted with open arms, or that people are going to retreat, is irrational. And it leads you to wonder whether the Israelis think that every time they open the toolbox and they see a hammer, that they have to use the hammer. This is just, I found it to be an almost irrational response, as if people in Israel are only talking to themselves, as if the military is dictating the policy there. I hope that's not the case.
It's a lot like Lebanon and a lot like Gaza, in the sense that I was thinking of it, almost comparing it to the last Gaza assault, but it was compressed into 12 hours. An overwhelming use of force, unnecessary force, disproportionate force, and then the spin machine quickly moving into gear, but creating just havoc in its wake.
Yes, and very counterproductive, because the spin machine said, well, we meant no harm. We didn't mean to kill 9 or 11 or 19, whatever the early numbers were. We went on board with paintball guns, and we were greeted with people who were enraged. We had no idea. And then the second message was, these were Al-Qaeda activists and Al-Qaeda terrorists. Wait a second. Well, which is it? If they're Al-Qaeda, why are you going on with paintball guns?
And if they're Al-Qaeda, why would they then release them all? Which was another issue. Just send them back?
Yeah, just, release them all. But the language here doesn't match what they did.
Are there consequences here? Open sea, international waters, a Turkish-flagged ship, a NATO member. Are there consequences for NATO, for the Mediterranean?
I think that there are embarrassing political consequences. The kind of mainstream CNN media here in America says, well, Turkey is led by an Islamist party. Turkey's a NATO member. The United States has worked hard for 6 decades to keep NATO together and to bind it together. For the United States to now have to choose between siding with a NATO member, and Turkey is enraged. or siding with an erstwhile ally like Israel. This is very uncomfortable politically for the United States, and they're trying to square the circle. You can just see them struggling in the White House to square the circle to satisfy the Turks at the same time as they're satisfying the Israelis. I don't think it's possible.
I want to talk about that a little bit because there are consequences to this U.S.-Turkey relationship more than its role with Israel. Turkey is a base we count on, an ally that we rely on in many instances. How you call it squaring the circle, I call it threading a needle. Is there a way to thread this needle? Turkey's been outraged. They've called on the U.S. to support their position.
Yes.
Can the U.S. afford not to?
The U.S. cannot afford not to, but it can talk quietly to both parties and say to the Turks, well, we understand you're enraged, but we've gotten the Israelis to agree to, without making public how much pressure they're putting on Israel. That's one way to do it, and they're trying to do that. I think that within the military, within the U.S. military, this is a lot different and very worrisome. My sense from military officers in CENTCOM and EUCOM is that somebody has to get this situation under control, and that somebody has to satisfy the Turks here, and somebody has to point out in no uncertain terms to the Israelis that boarding a ship on the high seas in violation, what seems to me clear violation of international law, is not acceptable.
Well, the U.S. response has been kind of interesting. In the beginning, it was very muted and muddled. Today's headlines say we warned them ahead of time, using the language you did, that you don't board the ship.
Yeah.
We think that this is a non-sustainable situation and that something has to give with regard to the embargo. Are we going to have a continuing evolution of this position? Have they gone as far as they want to go? Do you expect to see any further changes? Is there pressure from below to move this situation in a different direction?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I saw the same reports you did, and there's something that doesn't ring true about the report that we talked to the Israelis ahead of time about doing this kind of activity. My sense from the administration and talking to the administration is that nobody was really paying attention to the Gaza flotilla. No one took this very seriously. It was as well a bunch of progressive lefties, good intentions, but policies really made here in Washington, don't worry about it, it'll turn out all right. Now there's a little backtracking. We warned Israel not to do this. That sounds a little bit too clever. I just don't think there was a phone call to the Prime Minister's office in Israel saying, don't step over this line. That seems out of character for this administration. I think now there's a lot of scrambling to make us look better than we actually were.
But will the position evolve further? Are the Turks pushing this forward?
The Turks are pushing pretty hard, and I think that there's two things that are going to have to be satisfied here. We're going to have to deal with the Gaza problem. We're going to have to figure out a way to end that siege while satisfying Israel's security requirements that they're going to insist on. And the second thing is we're going to have to find a way to satisfy Turkey's diplomatic and political concerns that this was an illegal act and people have to pay for it. That's going to be the much tougher thing to do.